Hey Computer, play About Bees podcast.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome back once again to another exceptional episode of About Bees, Culture, and Curiosity. This is Ron Miksha, and I'm hosting with...
Bidzina Mosiashvili.
Okay, hi Bidzina, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Ron. How are you?
I'm super fantastically well myself. I like your new glasses.
Thank you. It's been a long time coming since I lost my prescription about 3 years ago, and
Oh my goodness.
I know I thought to myself, oh, this is just another thing that I got to worry about, and I knew I was gonna lose it, this expensive item, and so I decided not to get a second pair, but it just gets worse, and mostly I have an issue with stigmatism. It's just and it's a noticeable difference. You know, when
good. So these really help.
I didn't realize it how much I couldn't see actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. But,
I've heard that. I've heard that from people. So yeah, good for you. I'm glad you did that. That's great. So now you'll be able to see who you're talking to out there.
Well, yeah, a little bit. Yes, it does help.
What are we doing today?
As well, but
yeah. Oh yeah, I'll bet. When you can't quite see and you're trying to focus, you're trying to squint, you're trying to make something out, and then it's a lot of extra work for the brain.
Right. That could be used for creativity instead of trying to.
And and also it makes you look very intellectual.
That's a bonus. I'll take anything that adds to my looks.
Okay. All right. What are we doing today? What's up?
But today, we're going to be continuing our conversation about what's killing the bees, because this is a hot topic debate right now.
Yeah, I guess it's all over the internet and all over people's conversations about bees.
It is, because
how about yeah, go ahead.
No,
it is because
it seemed for a little bit, we were kind of, the scare about the bees dying was dying down a little bit, but here we are in 2025 and it's just back on everybody's agendas.
What do you think's causing it? Any ideas? Why suddenly is it so much worse?
I don't know. It could be like right now, I'm using words from more experienced beekeepers, but it's all pure speculation right now. But the biggest thing that comes to mind is we have seen the climate get warmer globally. That's the biggest factor that I could. But from what I understand, bees like warmer weather, but so does varroa mite. But I don't know. Everything also kind of gets blamed on this varroa mite. This is like varroa mite this, varroa mite that. But we honestly don't. This is kind of pure speculation right now.
I think you're right. I think we honestly don't know for sure, but we've been hearing reports of over 50%. I mean, that's been headlining news stories on the various bee journals and online right now. 50% losses have been reported, and it's only mid-February too. So by the time spring actually comes around, I always thought the worst time of the year for bees to make it through winter was March, because, it's up through February, it's your population of bees. They could be queenless, as long as they don't have a lot of virus or mites or whatever else might be killing them. As long as that's been taken care of in the fall, then usually you have a population of bees right through February. But by March, that's when you start finding out whether or not you had a good queen, because then things just start to go downhill. And if you don't, so I'm kind of surprised that the losses are already being reported in February so high. But I think you told me that the southern United States has been reporting pretty high losses in some areas. But is that authoritative report, or is that something you heard from somebody who heard it from somebody?
I guess this is more hearsay that I'm hearing. uh, uh, there hasn't been nothing reported yet, but it came from a report. It's public, so I guess I could comment about this. It was from an Instagram page posted from Russian. Uh, Sorry, it's in the background here. It's called the Rushing River Apiaries. I don't want to get it wrong, by Christina McDonald. And
Where are
she
they
made
located at? The Russian River.
Yes, they're located in central BC.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
The exact location, I could bring it up later, but it's in BC. They're located out of BC, and she had a
Okay.
report that came out today that said
On
that
Instagram.
on Instagram that
Okay.
southern beekeepers in the U.S. have reported a high colony death rate already.
Okay. So did she give a source for how she found that out?
No.
No. Okay. Okay. But she must have had some information, or she wouldn't have been sharing it. I mean, she's reputable. She's not going to be making up anything for any particular reason whatsoever. So I would kind of guess that she's heard that maybe directly from some beekeepers in the southern states.
I'm guessing too, if she has some maybe family there, some relatives, but I'm just trying to. So we have a report here from the morningagclips.com, and it was posted 4 days ago.
Morning AG. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, morningagclips.com. America's #1 AG news source. So agricultural news source. They're
Oh, not Attorney General. I'm thinking Attorney General because the politics have been in the news so much lately.
Right. Yeah. So it's agricultural news.
Agriculture AG.
Yeah. So from the Honeybee Health Coalition, severe sudden losses of managed honeybee colonies across the nation. The symptom of loss of reminiscent of colony collapse disorder conditions which occurred in 2007 to 2008. A commercial beekeeper in USA inspect their bees after winter to transport over 90% of the nation's managed colonies. And then survey resulting are still
So
accumulating.
hang on just for a second before you keep reading. I want to clarify something there. So according to this AG news item that you're reading, AG Morning,
Yeah,
that's a website.
morningagclips.com.
Beekeepers are inspecting their colonies of bees because 90% of the colonies of bees in the southern United States, or the entire United States, I'm not sure if I'm clear
These
on
are
that.
these are commercial beekeepers across the USA. So all commercial beekeepers
Okay.
across the USA.
Okay, it's pretty early for commercial beekeepers in colder climates, so, to be looking in mid-February at their colonies. Now, you started to say migrate or move their bees.
Right. So as commercial beekeepers in USA inspect their bees after winter to transport over the 90. So I'm guessing these are the beekeepers that are getting their bees for transporting for
To where?
for the
Almonds,
Yeah.
of course,
Yeah.
almonds. But
Yes.
isn't that a little late now? So, I thought almonds
That's
were
true.
already well into bloom by this time of the year.
Well,
They should already
their
be there.
the survey that they got is
Mhm.
from the Honeybee Health Coalition, and it was gathered from 234 beekeepers, found an average recent loss of 50%.
Okay, that's pretty serious.
Yeah,
No date associated with that?
that was this year. So the combined losses during the other times a year, this additional loss puts as many beekeepers at a loss of rate of 70 to 100% over the past 12 months. So
wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
So their whole outfits are flipped upside down. So I'm guessing that would mean that maybe 25 or 30% had already died over the summer, or into the fall, and then they went back out and looked at what was left and found 50% of those are also dead. And then, of course, if they found those last year, the dead early enough, they could have replaced them, made splits or something. This is going to be pretty seriously bad.
Yeah, so it says here in January 2025, beekeepers discovered sudden losses. In response, surveys were shared to determine the extent of the problem and samples were collected. A collaborative e-tort between Project APIS and American Beekeeping Foundation, American Honey Producers Association, apiculture extension programs, and beekeepers such as Bert Addy allowed for rapid collection of real-time information to determine if these losses were regional or widespread. Surveys and
Okay, so
interviews. Yeah, sorry.
yeah, that uh, gentleman's name that you said there, it's 80. 80 is how their
80.
name is pronounced. Yeah, they're the largest, as far as I know. They're still the largest of all beekeepers in the world, with maybe 80,000 colonies of bees. So if they're one of the 234 reporting their rate of loss, then it becomes very serious, and the numbers, well, obviously the numbers
So
can be trusted, and it's a pretty serious problem.
yeah, so they say here the cause has not been identified, but they have kind of deducted some causes that didn't. So the causes have not been identified. However, uh, usual causes of loss, including winter management and high levels of parasitic mites, are not currently indicated causes of these losses.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we could kind of cross those two off, right? The evidence is pointing towards it wasn't poor winter management and it wasn't the cause of high parasitic levels of mites.
Right. So it could be something completely different that we're not really thinking about. You mentioned changes in climate. I'm reluctant to go along with that. I mean, I do agree the climate has changed a lot and it's going to continue to change. It's a very serious issue, much more serious than most people are willing to appreciate. I mean, I spent 30 years working in the oil patch and working as a geophysicist. And while I was at Exxon, one of the divisions we had was looking at how much of an effect or an impact our exploration work was going to have on global warming. And it was a given. It was the scientists whom I worked with, the scientists who were in charge, they all knew that it was global warming caused by greenhouse gases. And they were looking at engineering ways of mitigating that, of changing it, of taking care of it. Well, they were one of the few who were actually trying to investigate ideas about what can we do to slow this down, but it obviously is getting worse and worse instead of being stopped. As long as we're using 100 million barrels of oil every day, I mean, this is such an enormous amount of energy being used that uh, all of that gets burnt, all that goes up in smoke, all that goes into the air, even just the effect of the pollution. If you had an opportunity to travel in some developing countries, as I have, where they're still highly dependent on like, 2-cylinder motorcycles that smoke out as much oil and pollution as they do,
Right.
for every mile as a modern car might. Anyway, we have a real problem. I'm not doubting that, but what I am doubting is that would be affecting honeybees. I can see it definitely affecting some of the bees that are very sensitive to temperatures, such as bumblebees are a really good example. Bumblebees are big, heavy, fluffy, furry for a reason, because they tend to live in cold climates where you need that bulkiness. If you're short, squat, and heavy, you maintain your heat better. Plus, all that hair on a bumblebee is really good insulation. But if you are skinny and wiry, and you're going to chill more quickly. So these bumblebees could get overheated, and they need to be able to move to cooler places. So they go up mountains when the climate starts to warm up, because it's
Yeah.
cooler as you go higher up a mountain. So we've actually chronicled that. We note that. We actually have evidence that they are moving. But could you imagine if the bumblebees are, say, nesting somewhere on the coast of Virginia, or even near the edge of Lake Erie or something like that, and they try to go north? There's nowhere north to go. It's suddenly it's ocean. I mean, you can go on a peninsula off the coast of the United States and keep going north to look for cooler weather. And it's not like they're thinking about this or saying, oh, we got to look for cooler weather. What happens is the ones that are stuck in areas that get overheated start to die off. And the ones that accidentally migrate to a slightly cooler place have a better reproductive success. And that's where we start finding more and more of the same species. They have migrated, not that they thought it out, not that they talked to somebody that used to work for Exxon, none of that. They just kind of think to them, they don't think to themselves. They kind of evolve so that they can survive. And if they can't survive in an area that becomes too hot, they die off. Now, honeybees, as you correctly pointed out already, they are basically a warm weather species of insect. And
Right.
they have way less hair than a bumblebee. They are skinnier. They developed in areas, for the most part, that are cooler, that are warmer climate. I mean, there's several species or subspecies, races of honeybees that are in Africa, and there are a lot that developed around the Mediterranean, and we think that's the original homeland of all honeybees, is somewhere around the Mediterranean, maybe the country of Georgia, I don't know. Somewhere in that general area is where honeybees originally developed. So they can take very warm weather, and we transport them. We keep them in Africa. We keep them in South America. We keep them in Arizona. So they do okay in really hot climates, much hotter than what the global average is going to end up being here in a few years. So I don't think it's climate.
Right.
What
So yeah, go ahead, sir.
Well, the only way that I'm thinking that climate could be linked to the success of the honeybee would be if their parasites have a better experience, or more active in a warmer climate, or other problems. But I'm thinking viruses, definitely. That's probably something that's going around, and maybe it doesn't take too many varroa mites to spread, a really serious new virus that could be affecting the bees. So it might not be completely one-to-one correlated between the number of varroa mites and the problem with viruses, but it could be something really different. It could be the medications we're putting in the hives to kill the mites that are affecting the bees. It could be um, pesticides in the soil that have just kind of reached that tipping point. Like, it's hard to say.
What I'm kind of curious about is they kind of mentioned that these symptoms are reminiscent of the colony collapse disorder, right?
Mhm.
Now this colony collapse disorder, is this also unknown? Like, why is this happening? Or are we a little bit a better idea of like?
I personally, I don't know. There might be some information out there, but it's so contradictory. Some will say one thing and others will disagree with the findings. But uh, so I don't know if I can unequivocally state what the problem with colony collapse disorder was, but I do think that it was a virus associated with varroa mites that caused most of the loss. But that could be so complex. How did it spread so quickly? Because pollination was starting to become a really big thing in California at about the same time that the collapse was starting. It could be, a combination of the stress of moving colonies of bees, plus parking them next to other bees that were carrying an obscure virus. And then that jumped into everybody's bees, because they get to California, the Central Valley, and these bees can just mix, your bees from New York State and somebody else's bees from Georgia and somebody else's bees from Washington State, and they're all parked within a few hundred meters of each other.
And they're
So the
all
disease is spread.
they're being taken back to the same. Well, they're some of them are being brought back to their regions with those.
Yeah, they will be
diseases.
taken back. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. In general, they will go back to the locations where the beekeepers call home. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. This is because like sometimes I feel like, are we beating a dead horse here? Like, what if we take a look at other our agricultural industries, like for example, the chicken industry right now, that we're experiencing a huge salmonella outbreak or something like that in the chickens, and all the eggs have to be recalled. But
No, again, it's a bird. It's not. I don't think it's salmonella. That's a bacterial infection that I think you get in your food. It starts to grow, and then it gets in your belly, and it starts to kill you. I think the problem is a bird flu virus. Again, a virus, and that
Right.
virus has jumped to cows. It's jumped to humans, and so it's very mobile.
Right. So, they're gonna have to like kill a bunch of chickens or something like
Mhm.
that. So if they look at the statistics, we're like, oh, we're with the 50% of the chickens that we had supply of that had to be killed last year. How many times have that's happened? We've done that quite a few times. So I'm just wondering, I mean, I guess that's on purpose, and this is more of the unique part of the bee thing is it's just they're just dying on their own.
Right. That's a really good point. There was a time when the mites were first discovered that regulating officers were killing bees that they thought had mites, but that was so ineptly handled. I mean, they made so many mistakes when they were running around gassing off people's honeybee hives. In You could be in Orange County, California, and somebody would have discovered some tracheal mites in your bees. They will be killed, and just 500 meters away is a different county. They weren't discovered in that county yet, so they were left alive. Like that was ridiculous to try to control the spread of a disease by exterminating bees when bees are flying kilometers around and the disease is spreading and it's so hard to locate, and you pull a sample of 100 bees and you don't see anything, but maybe a different 100 bees from the same colony would have discovered the problem. So that was awful. That was it was inexcusable what was done to beekeepers. I didn't have any of mine destroyed by anybody, but I saw it happen to other people. And, what can they do? The government comes along, they destroy all your bees because the mite could be in their colonies, and not just the one hive, but their whole outfit and somebody else's bees they weren't found in, so they were allowed to survive. That was just wrong. Now, with the chickens, a little different because these chickens are living in coops of 50,000 in one building or so, and several buildings, and they never see sunlight. They don't get out on the grass. It's disgusting how we raise them, but in their case, if you do have a virus in among those chickens, it's likely that it hasn't spread because those birds are never going to fly. They're not going to go fly and forage, for bugs or worms, uh, grain, they're not quail, they're not geese. So there's a difference there. And I guess you could exterminate those poor chickens, probably be doing them a favor if you did.
Yeah. Yeah, I just kind of a little note on that chicken stuff. I've seen these mobile chicken coops where so people are pretty much raising free range chickens, but on a mass scale by having these chicken coops where they place it on a field that has wheels, and every day they move it to a different quadrant on the field so the chickens can eat all the vegetation and the bugs out of the grass.
I see.
And
I
then
see. I
they
guess.
all fertilize the grass at the same time because they are moving from quadrant to quadrant.
Yeah, I guess I could understand that being quite a bit better than being stuck inside the buildings, the sheds, and these tiny little cages. So yes, that's a big improvement, and I can understand how it would be effective for the farmers because when my grandparents raised chickens on their farm, they had a small area. Well, when I say small, it'd be like the size of an entire lot in a city. So say a quarter of an acre or so, like a pretty good expense. But
Right.
it wasn't, it was soon that was the chicken coop area, a little smaller than that, but that was the chicken coop area. And it wasn't long before all the grass was picked clean and they were just running around on dirt. And, so if that fence had been moved from time to time and all the birds with it, so they had exposure to a different set of grass and something fresh, that would certainly have been a lot healthier. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, if and kind of the same analogy with beekeeping, we like things can be done at a commercial scale without doing it that kind of the gross way that we were talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're right. And you just kind of reminded me of something very similar to these free ranging, semi free ranging chickens that are still inside of cages, but they're huge cages that are set up on wheels and can be moved around to different parts of a farmer's field. In a way, some of the beekeepers who are pulling their bees out of the California almonds at about this time, mid-February, well, I guess into March, they'll be moving them. Then they sometimes place them in very remote areas where the bees have a chance to have a really good variety of good fresh pollen that will, replace the very tough conditions that they came out of. They are so crowded in these almond groves that they are not receiving much nutrition other than the pollen from the almonds. So beekeepers many of them will go through and slap a pollen cake, pollen patty on each colony of bees just to give them something more, something different, some extra variety of amino acids and some extra minerals and so on, as well as the pollen they're collecting from the almonds. But that's still not quite enough as, it would be if they had a more various, a better variety of natural forage to choose from. So pulling your bees out of the almond groves in about a month, you would probably want to find a place maybe in Oregon or Washington State, or maybe off over the ranges into Nebraska or North Dakota, where there's a wide variety of dandelion, crocus, a lot of other types of plants are starting to come into bloom, and also way less dense beekeeping is being conducted in those areas.
Right. Man, I can only imagine the logistics of transporting I can't even imagine the logistics of transporting bees from that many bees from, one state to another and then taking it back home or maybe taking it to another location because it's better than home.
Right?
Uh, yeah. So logistically, was it a nightmare? Because you had to deal with this.
Oh, it was tough. It was really tough. There were many, many days sleeping on the seat of the truck and waking up and not knowing where I was,
Right.
having kind of lost track. I was
There's
driving
no
late into
Google
the night.
Maps.
There's no Google Maps, and you're on the side of the road. It wasn't until you fired up and started heading down the road out of the rest stop and you saw your first sign. You said, "Oh, that's right. I'm in Tennessee now." So it was hard. It was very hard. Beekeepers would tend to go to the same places year after year and tend to become friends with the farmers and people who live in each of those areas so that you would know where you're going to go with those bees. It would be so different if each time you had to look for a location immediately upon arrival. I know some beekeepers who have done that. They've had big truckloads of bees They've moved, and then they hop out of the truck and they start talking to farmers at a coffee shop or somewhere who would like to have some bees in their property. Hey, I'll take, what do you got? 100, 200 hives? And they would go to that location and unload them. I know a beekeeper personally whom I learned a lot from. He was a beekeeper who originally started in Southern California, ended up with about 5,000 colonies of bees. Back in the day when 5,000 colonies of bees was a really huge operation, I'm talking like the 1950s. And he was in Nebraska, and then he started hauling bees into the Dakotas and back. Then he decided Florida was better than California, so he started wintering in Florida. And he told me the first time he took bees from California when he was quite young, from California to, I think Nebraska or maybe Kansas, he came without any idea where the bees were gonna go. He just had 300 hives of bees in the back of the truck. He was making a trip out there to just look for locations. He had a lot more to bring, and he thought, "Well, I'm not gonna drive out there with nothing in the back of my truck." So he loaded up 300 hives of bees and completely cold called on the farmers and found people that would take his bees in, allow him to set them up. So
Wow.
it is a logistic mess, but on top of that, I give great kudos both to those very, very hardworking farmer beekeepers who are trying to make a living doing this. And so anything I've said about, what goes on in the bee patch, it's not intended to be disparaging. It's just, you know, exhibiting the facts as they really are. But I give kudos to them for surviving all of this, doing this hard work, making all this food possible for the 8 billion people in the world who need to eat and eat 3 times a day. And also, I think we have to acknowledge the really hard work done by brokers who basically spend the time looking for and talking to the grove owners, like the almond groves, and finding out who needs how many colonies, and then lining up beekeepers to fill those needs or those niches. That again is quite a project to have to do.
Yeah. And at the time when you were beekeeping, when you were doing this, from this was, I would say, was this in the 70s or in the 80s?
Yeah, both 70s and 80s, yes.
And at that time, was there like, I'm sure that people were aware of varroa mite and colony collapse disorder, or was this not even being discussed at that time?
We didn't have to contend with that at all until about 1985, 86, 87, somewhere right around that time. And by that time, I had personally made up my mind that I was going to stay in one place and not be a migratory beekeeper. I had a couple of young kids. I wanted to stay in one location. Didn't want to have them move schools and travel around. We'll stay in one place. And I chose Saskatchewan. And that's when I stayed permanently in one location. It wasn't migrating place. But yes, very soon the mites come along and just made everything really difficult for all the beekeepers.
Is what I'm kind of where I'm kind of going with this is, it seemed like it happened overnight, and for decades people were migrating bees, and there wasn't an issue, and then this seemed to happen, over a course of a couple years. So I don't know if we can blame migratory beekeeping for this issue that we're experiencing now, too. Go
Yeah, I
ahead.
don't know either. I don't know. I guess to some extent we would have to, because if you have a serious problem in one location, it suddenly pops up in several others. And
Correct.
if 90% of those colonies of bees that you just read about end up in California, that is a mixing grounds for all sorts of diseases and problems and pests and mites and viruses and so on. So I think, obviously it is a problem that's being generated by the migratory beekeepers. Not that they want to, they would much rather not have any of these problems to deal with, but they're trying to make a living. They're trying to feed us. They're moving their bees into these locations, and then they have to pull them out just before things start to get sprayed in California, and they have to pull those bees out and move them back home to their other locations. And then, of course, they're bringing along whatever pests they managed to pick up while they were there. So,
It it is a bit of a miracle that we have the world economy has been able to feed, like pretty much like the food issue has been like people aren't starving anymore. From what
You're
I understand.
absolutely correct.
Yeah.
I lived through the starvation part of the world back when I was a child, a very young kid, say in the late 1960s or so. At school, we would talk about even bring pennies to school to send to places in other parts of the world. And those places included probably 2/3 of the world's population, where people were immediately at risk of starvation. Now we have people starving to death, quite a few, much more than we ever should, but it's entirely because of civil strife, because of civil wars, because of animosity between neighbors, because of not bureaucrats, because of autocracies, because of governments that refuse to allow their own people to survive and have some sense of dignity and food for the children. That's why people are starving today, not because we're not producing enough food. The distribution is certainly the problem, but on top of that's the politics of the whole
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, and like I guess the numbers out there that if there was no bees, we wouldn't have 70% or something like that of our crops. I wonder really like what is the true impact that beekeeping's had to that contribution of food supply,
Mhm.
like
Ex
like reaching
Excellent
our limit.
question. I've looked at that several different directions and over a number of years to try to understand it, because we do hear figures like, well, 2/3 of all the food comes from bees. It does not. That's a bit of a misinterpretation of the data. The fact is that a lot of foods don't need bees at all, and I'm talking wheat, rice, potatoes, corn. They can
Yeah.
all do quite well without honeybees. And those 4 plants or so will feed almost everybody in the world and almost 60 or 80% of everything they need. But where the honeybee shines is when you want to add better nutrition to the mix. When you want apples and cherries and other berries, and you want almonds, and you want melons and squash and so on, you need some sort of pollinator on them. And often it's honeybees. It could be native bees, wild bees, other bees. But the idea that we would all starve without bees, everybody would die within 4 years if the honeybee disappeared from the face of the earth. No, no, that's not going to happen. It did not happen to the people who lived on islands where there were no honeybees for thousands of years, or who lived in our the far north of Canada, Norway, and Russia. Those people survived without having flowers, without having berries. They still, raised children, lived, told their stories, survived without any impact from or any help from honeybees. But
But
we wouldn't want to do without those honeybees because of the
like
variety of foods.
right, and but like would we sustain this economic growth and this population growth without that variety, the nutritional variety? Could we just everybody just eat corn and potatoes and wheat? I mean, the Irish love their potatoes, the Mexicans love the corn, and then the Asians love their rice. So I guess that's
Yeah,
almost fifty
you're pretty
percent of the
much
world.
answering. Yes, you're answering your question. We would still have a huge population, but it may be quite different as far as our health would be concerned. And, our basically, we do much better by having a variety of food, just as the bees do better, having a variety of different types of plants to work on, giving them differences in the vitamins and nutrition that they really need. Same with people. So we definitely need those honeybees. We need those beekeepers to provide enough variety in our diets. And as people hopefully become wealthier around the world, and hopefully also our population quits growing at the enormous rate that it has been, then people will all want to have a little better quality of food. And that definitely will require the honeybee or robotic bees or more native bees. In some way, we have to have pollination. I don't know about you, but I'd have trouble living without peppers. And tomatoes, thanks to the bumblebees that do their buzz pollination.
So is there any like, examples that you could think of where countries have strategic honey reserves?
Well, yeah, for a long time, the United States did. I haven't lived there for so long that I don't know what the status is now, but at one time, they had a price stabilization program where in good years where there was a lot of production of honey, it was purchased by the United States government, put into warehouses, and then distributed to children at schools or allowed back onto the market again when there was a shortage of honey. So there was something of a strategic honey supply. I doubt they have anything like that today. I don't know what the status is on that. That's something maybe one of our listeners could send us a note and let us know what
Yeah.
they think.
Because in my mind, if you are thinking about you're trying to project power on the world stage and you're trying to, be this dominant superpower, agriculture would be part of the equation. And, they
Mhm.
probably have some sort of strategic beekeepers, something program. Because if you don't, that's a kind of a big missing equation.
Well, there are subsidies of different sorts for the beekeepers to kind of keep them in business. So, they do have low interest programs for small farmers. And let's face it, even the biggest beekeeper, well, he's not a small business anymore. They're worth $100 million or so in these really big operations, or tens of millions of dollars for sure. But that's still not like Apple or Microsoft or Ford Motor or, there's still medium-sized to small businesses, and there are lots of support for smallish kinds of companies in agriculture. So there is some help in the United States, much less in Canada. We hardly have anything. We don't have any buyback programs. We don't have any subsidies for the beekeepers or farmers of any sort. Every farmer is very much on their own in Canada. We just don't have the political influence in our parliament that the American representatives do in their Congress. They just have a better political system for being able to help the farmers than we do up here.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's probably a surprise to some of the people listening because they sometimes think that Canada has a bit of a socialist sort of a system, but we absolutely do not. Like we're very far removed from that. And in many ways, we rely more on individual initiative than they do in the United States. Even our retirement incomes are much, much smaller than they are in the United States. I'd say about a third for the average person that you could collect in your old age, unless you're truly destitute. And then there is a bit of a kick in, but that applies to maybe 5 or 10% of the entire retired population. And that's just to help them so that they can live with some sort of dignity. But in the United States, these things are taken for granted and frequently increased very easily. So what are you looking for? Looks
So
like you're looking something up. Tell me.
I'm just trying to kind of go back to this survey that that they found in 2025 of these commercial beekeepers experiencing 50% colony death rate. Uh, like, is this? I mean, it is something to be afraid about.
It certainly is. Losing 50% of the bees right now is a very, very serious problem. It could have so many ramifications. The almond growers, I don't know how well they're doing this year for getting enough pollination, but when the bees are in short supply, then for pollination, then the almond growers have to continually raise the rate so they could try to seduce some beekeeper into parking bees on their property so they can get adequate pollination. So the cost of pollination would be going up. Right now, it's not the majority expense for an almond grower, but it's a pretty big expense. They do spend quite a lot of money per acre to make sure they have adequate pollination. But on the other hand, the bees will increase the amount of almonds on a tree by not double, not triple, but 4 or 5 times in a lot of cases. So they're getting a lot bigger crop for the relatively small investment of a couple hives of bees for pollination. So they need them, but like all farming, it's very competitive, which makes it very marginal. If you're a good enough producer that you can cut costs and you can sell your product cheaper, and then everybody has to try to compete and sell their almonds cheaper, and then they're really hurting when it comes to finding extra dollars to try to pay the beekeepers who are suffering with fewer bees. It's a very difficult situation for everybody.
It is. And if we go back in history, there has been kind of recorded events in beekeeping history in the last 100 years where there has been major collapse disorder, and just kind of starting from the first one, in the 1906, the Isle of Wight disease. Beekeepers on the Isle of Wight noticed mass deaths with colonies disappearing. This was 100 years ago. And then we also had the great bee shortage of 1920s to 1930s, USA and Europe. And beekeepers again reported severe colony losses attributed to harsh winters, habitat destruction, and early pesticide use. And then in the 1940s and the 1960s, we have the DDT crisis, dichloral.
Yeah, we know what DDT is. Yep.
Yeah,
We know that
yeah,
pesticide.
yeah.
Yep.
And then, of
Yes.
course, in the 80s, we have the varroa mite epidemic, and the 90s, where it kind of persisted. And then continuing on, then the colony collapse disorder, 2006, where it started to get reports of this.
Right.
So it just it seems like beekeepers are just constantly dealing with a new wave of bosses. It's like a
I like that. That's a good explanation. They sure are. Yes, a new wave of bosses. And most of them are outside the control of all these poor beekeepers. It's tough. And on top of that, all farming depends on farmers who buy all of their input expenses, everything they have to buy, tractors or trucks for beekeepers and equipment. You buy all that at a retail price and you sell your product at a wholesale price. That's a tough niche to try to maintain when you're paying high consumer type prices. You go out and buy a truck, unless you're buying a fleet of 17 trucks to run a huge honey farm, you're not going to get much of a discount. So you're paying the same price anybody off the street's going to pay. And that's true for your electricity that you're using in your shop. It's the same for the new roof you had to put on your buildings, anything like that. You're paying retail. But when it comes time to sell your corn or your soybeans or your honey, you are dependent upon the wholesale price at that moment. Yeah.
I read a picture here is somewhere where maybe you're also referring to the same picture, but it's maybe I can find it. It's pretty much what you said, and
The picture,
man,
the picture of a farmer.
yeah, what you said, they buy at wholesale, and then, or they buy at retail and then sell at wholesale. But it was kind of a very
much more
interesting.
clever than what I just said, right?
Well,
Is that your
there
point?
was like
Is that your point?
there was
here?
four. So the farmer is so JF Kennedy said this. John F. Kennedy said this. So the farmer
Really?
is So the farmer is the only man or woman in our economy who buys everything at retail, sells everything at wholesale, and buys the freight both ways.
And pays the freight both ways.
Yeah, and pays
Oh,
the freight both ways.
yeah, I never heard him. I can't even imagine that John F. Kennedy would have said that. I mean, he's a city boy and came from a rich background, Ivy League. Like somebody must have told him that as a joke, and then he thought, "Hey, that's clever enough to repeat." But yeah, it's true. It's true, and I didn't know that. Yeah, yep. Anyway, we're not solving all the problems of the world today in this episode. We'll come back with something a little more specific to beekeeping. We do have quite a few people lined up that want to come on and be interviewed, and it's going to be fun to talk to them. I think in particular, I'd really like to get back with Ted, the beekeeper queen breeder in Florida, to see what he knows about the enormous loss of bees around the world, around the southern United States at least, that part of the world, and also learn about how he produces 250,000 queen cells every year. That would be amazing. It'd be interesting to hear. That's about 1 in 10 of every queen bee in North America comes out of his farm.
That's a really wild statistic, and it seems like someone should know, more people should know about that, but it is, I think
I don't know. Is it good or bad to know about that? I mean, somebody's gonna say he's got a monopoly there. Although I think most people are gonna just be impressed, surprised, and pleased that there's somebody working that hard to keep this industry going.
No, I think I'm very optimistic about the future of beekeeping. Well, the only thing that's going to stop the growth of humanity is a natural disaster. We're on a
Oh,
trajectory.
no. I disagree. I disagree entirely. We're on a trajectory where as people become wealthier, then they have fewer children. And this is true universally. It's true in every continent. The population is declining in lots of parts of Europe. And the country of Hungary, which I'm very familiar with because I've been there a dozen times, the country of Hungary maxed out its population about 20 years ago when it reached 10.8 million people, fewer than 11 million. Today, there are about 9 million people. It's projected it's going to go down to about 8 million in another generation or so because families are much smaller. And that's true with Germany. It's true with parts of England, Bulgaria. So a lot of Europe has diminishing populations. That's just the given state of things. And in places where we typically have seen very high rates of population growth, and I'm talking like India and particularly China, the populations there, in China more for political reasons, but they're engineering their society to reduce the number of children, and they're getting a lot of associated problems because of that. You can't tell people things like that. So the result then is those places have diminishing populations. And I think the world population is going to reach a peak. It's been predicted in about 25 years. Around the year 2050, the world population will probably max. And from then on, the world human population is going to get smaller and smaller. Because, yeah, go ahead.
No. Sorry.
I want to hear what you have to say. I've been talking too much.
Finish. I didn't mean to cut off there. You were about
Okay,
to say.
I was going to say that even among people who traditionally have very large families in wealthy societies, and I'm thinking of, for instance, my friends in the 100 colonies, my friends who are Catholic, and others who generally would have large families, and now they're having much, much smaller families. So the population decline is setting in across the board. It's just everywhere.
Yeah. So what I was gonna say is, I've, the people that like study populations, demographics. What are they exactly called? demographists.
No, I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a good word for it.
Yeah. So I've watched a video from them, and they say that maybe I can put the video up for everyone, just a little picture of it, because it's a TED video. But so the person explained that nature has some sort of internal mechanism for population control, and which is, for humans, it's that 10 billion mark. When we hit 10 billion, we tend to start to get reduce, and then it starts to consolidate. But it's when it starts to consolidate back up to the 5 billion, when it starts to go back down, it just shoots back up. So we will kind of play around in this range here.
No, that's possible. That will take centuries to see whether or not that's true. Centuries before the population gets down to 5 billion and then jumps back up to 10 billion. These things don't happen overnight. And it's a pretty tough thing to predict in that far into the future. You started to say that you thought population was going to grow and grow and grow until some dramatic natural phenomena happens. Well, in
No,
year 2032, we're going to get hit by an asteroid that will probably wipe out all human life. But if that
sorry.
misses,
No, if it misses, yep. If it misses.
that asteroid,
Yeah.
if it misses, then just have a good day. If it hits us, well, you're not having a very good day. But anything could happen. But I think that this idea that's being presented on that TED Talk that you're referring to is true for some types of species, not for humans. Humans have just outsmarted the system, and we are in control of our population in a different way. But if we look at things like the number of, let's just use an example, the number of wolves and rabbits. So rabbit population goes way up. It reaches the carrying capacity of the environment. Diseases start to spread because of the high density of population of rabbits, and they start to go hungry and they start to die off. But when they reach that top population, then the wolves have a very happy time. They reproduce like crazy, lots and lots of wolves and foxes in the world, and they're eating all these rabbits. But suddenly the rabbit population goes way down. But just at that time, the wolf population is starting to climb because they took advantage of a couple seasons earlier when there was lots and lots of rabbits. So then the wolf population goes way up and then starts to crash down. And with fewer wolves in the system, then the rabbits have fewer predators and they start to cycle back up. So we have this oscillating cycle.
Right.
And it's very common in ecology for a lot of things outside of rabbits and wolves and foxes or whatever it's eating them. Outside of those, it just happens even if you have a jar and you put some bacteria growing in there, they will eventually reach a population where there's not enough food and some of them start eating each other, and then the population goes down a bit and then it goes back up again to reach, and then it gets overcrowded. So it's up and down and up and down on a lot of different scales. But humans, I think we have exempted ourselves from that system.
Interesting. So when I said earlier, I think the trajectory we're going on is just continuing innovation. I don't know about the population, but I think if we don't have a natural disaster, our technology is just going to get better. And if our technology does get better, I don't know if we need as such high population as we think we need.
That's already happening. Our technology is getting better. We have much better technology, much better food, much better nutrition. So people have decided then that, we don't need to have lots of children taking care of us in our old age. We're going to be okay. And
Technology.
we have fewer children.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, that's
Mhm.
true. Japan has they're kind of leading this front where they've automated their entire cities. If you have any sort of issue or just accessibility or whatever, like they allow their first graders to go to preschool by themselves, or like, they're preschoolers. They go to school by themselves. There's a whole show dedicated to this in Japan where they,
Yeah. I
so
didn't know that, but that's
yeah, it's so safe, and it's so it's so accessible that just all you need is your phone, and you can get around anywhere in all of Japan pretty much. But
yeah. And their population is, as you said, going downhill pretty fast. Well, we've been on this for over an hour. I feel like we've kind of kicked the can down the road a little bit further, and we solved a lot of the world's problems. Now, people who are listening, they know what to do next. So, we've done our duty, and then we'll come back again with, we have so many things that we could be discussing. I want to talk about honey at some point. Like what's in honey? What's the quality of honey? What's honey all about? And how do you judge honey? Is this a good jar of honey or a bad jar of honey? Is it entirely a personal taste, or are there other issues going on? And we have a person who is a honey judge that would be great to have on here. And she has already agreed. So I've just got to get the date picked out that's mutually available for us, and we'll have her on in the near future. So Bidzina, yeah, let's do it. Let's call it quits right here. And
it's a good
you
time.
Can take this animal home.
Well,
drive it home.
Thank you everyone for listening and for your attention. And just excuse, we've been kind of on the Zoom format lately. I don't know, maybe the audio isn't is the best.
Yes, it is. It's better than what we get back in the on campus. It's much better.
Oh, really? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a joke?
No joke.
Okay. I thought, is my sound coming out better too now, or?
Oh, your sound is
okay.
Do you have a new microphone?
No, I think the settings that we adjusted is just it.
Okay. Okay.
But okay, I guess we'll just drive it home because it's really the same thing here. We're not doing much different. There's slight delay between when we're talking and stuff, but really, like, this is it's negative 15 Celsius outside, and it's been like that for the last 2 weeks. Sometimes it went up to negative 30. So nobody wants to go outside right now.
No, it's pretty cold here right now, and we're going to see how the bees do when the weather warms up in about 10 days.
Yeah, we'll do a live podcast in the backyard one of these days with the bees.
Hey, that sounds like a really good plan. Okay, Bidzina. Thank you.
Yeah.
Goodbye, everybody.
I guess, goodbye, everyone. Come back next week at Monday, 8 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. Thank you for listening.
Bye.